Welcome to the 2024 Traveller Mayday Mayday event. I'm your host, Frank Succardi from CyborgPrime Games. My guest today is Mr. Martin Dougherty. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm Martin Dougherty. I'm a full-time writer. I have been for a lot of years. I write a lot of mainstream books, history books, mythology books, conflict, weaponry, that sort of thing. And I also write Traveller. It turns out quite a lot of Traveller.
Do you know exactly how many titles you've written for Traveller?
No. Somewhere between quite a lot and loads. I know that the list runs to a couple of pages in Word, but quite honestly, I don't know. I have reached the point in my career where I've forgotten some of the books I've written and found them in a bookstore and thought, that looks familiar, that looks like the sort of thing I would write. That happened.
That's funny. Hey, look at this book. Oh, this is a good one. Wait a
I have
minute.
literally done that. I have literally stood reading a book in a bookstore and thought, this is just like something I would write, and the writer writes just like, hang on a minute. Yeah.
So Martin, tell us a little bit about let's go back in the Wayback Machine. How did you first get involved in role-playing games?
My route in was unusual, I think. I remember sometime in late 1983, my mother asked me to come and listen to a radio program with her, which was about Dungeons and Dragons and this great new game that was really positive, and people were learning social skills and maths and stuff like that. About 6 months later, this satanic panic started and people changed their minds. But in the meantime, she bought the basic set for my sister for Christmas and asked me if I would help her figure it out. My sister was more interested in riding horses, but I stayed with the gaming. I met some people who played games, and within the first few months I had encountered Traveller and RuneQuest, which I liked much better than D&D. So I played Traveller and RuneQuest for ever after that.
Do you have a go-to career in that you like to play in Traveller?
In any game, I tend to play generalists. Somebody who's got a scattering of skills who can tackle almost anything. It doesn't have to be particularly amazing at anything, but I like to be somebody who can have a go at anything rather than being, a mini-maxed monster for one particular skill. And I know that makes me weird in modern gaming, but that's me. So, maybe scouts or merchants or some guy who's just sort of bounced from one career to another. If you look at what I've done in my career, yeah, that's pretty much the same thing in real life.
Did you ever stat yourself in Traveller?
No. No, I don't think I've ever done that.
Maybe in a way you have.
Well, yes, obviously I've created characters that I feel comfortable with playing. And yes, I mean, there's an element of, that's me. But I've never deliberately done it. I know there is a Traveller stat thing out there where you can stat yourself. It was for some con many years ago. I've never done it.
Mm-hmm. I'm not humble enough to do it.
No, neither am I.
Nope. So, do you remember your early days of Traveller, like how you were first introduced to it, or what? What was it that hooked you? Was it just that you liked science fiction better, or what was it? Was it the different mechanics that were the life path kind of thing,
The game mechanics were largely irrelevant. For me, I remember the very first game I played, and frankly, it was a bit silly. I remember that there was a servant robot called Smedley involved, and a plan to use a fusion gun as a reaction mass to propel ourselves along this ship when the gravity had failed, and it was all a bit daft. But something about it interests me. I think it was the idea that the characters were just kind of talented people rather than, level 22 superheroes. And that always appealed to me. Some bloke with a shotgun trying to solve a problem instead of being a superhero. I like that.
Right. Yeah, you couldn't punch your way through an airlock door, for instance. You had to smarts your way through.
I've always disliked the style of Traveller play where people want a plasma gun and battle dress, and they want to just storm around incinerating hordes of bad guys. I've always been more about, I want a revolver and a trench coat, and I'm going to try and solve these problems by maybe being smart and a bit sneaky and clever. The superhero end of things doesn't really appeal to me. So things like high-end D&D, I've tried to play it, and I found the mechanics defeated me because I'm stupid, and I just much preferred the idea of you're just this guy. He's quite good at starship engineering, and you've picked up this big wrench, and you've just got to solve the problem right now. That's I think what appealed about Traveller was it was sort of people like us in extraordinary situations.
What did you think about the were you when you first got into it, were you primarily a player or a GM or referee?
Throughout my gaming career, I've been almost exclusively a referee. I played the first game I played as a player, but I have an infinite amount of stories to tell. And I wanted to tell those stories, so naturally I would be writing games. And generally speaking, I ran pretty much everything for our group. Because I like making stuff up, I guess.
Mm-hmm. How did you go from Traveller player to Traveller writer?
Yeah. I've always been a writer. As early as 1984, I was writing for Fanzines. It was the golden age of the stapled, photocopied fanzine. And I just started writing for them because I'd wanted to. And I'd moved from there to semi-professional magazines, and I just wrote because I wanted to. And I remember in 1993, might have been 94, with Traveller New Era, I really liked it. It was the first game I'd bought in a long time because I used to just write everything. And I was very excited by it, so I wrote some stuff and sent it off to GDW, and they accepted it. They went under before they published it, but that's, unfortunate. But I just sort of did it because it seemed natural for me, and it's always seemed natural for me.
Did getting the approval from GDW inspire you to keep at it?
I don't know. At the time I was printing out manuscripts regularly on a first-generation laser printer and sending them off. I'd written 2 or 3 novels. I had a book published at that point. So GDW in particular, yes, it encouraged me a bit. It's always nice to succeed, even if you ultimately don't. But I've always been a writer, and it was natural to me just to keep at it once GDW went. Mm-hmm. The acceptance and then the company going under was a setback, but I don't recall it particularly discouraging me in any way. It was just, this is what's happening right now, send some stuff off to some other client.
So it didn't set you back too hard. I mean, you're already an author and maybe experienced with getting either things approved and not printed, or maybe even getting rejection and rewrites, or just flat out rejections.
Yeah, I was just starting out, but I'd had quite a bit of stuff published. And it was very exciting to get offered a novel contract by GDW. And then I heard from a gamer friend, they've gone under. That's why they haven't replied. And that was upsetting because obviously it was a big break that then didn't happen. And it wasn't the only big break that then didn't happen. But you either carry on or you don't.
So what did you pursue after that? Just figured, what was the next kind of path that you decided to take a stab at it?
I'd written a couple of novels. I'd become a client of the Maggie Noack agency, who was very high profile. And then I sent them a second manuscript, and my computer's just gone off. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
All right, yeah, that was weird. So I'd become a client of the Maggie Noack agency. I sent them a second manuscript, and it was just bounced by a reader. And I asked, what's happening here? Are you dropping me as a client? And they said, no, of course not. And a week later, they dropped me as a client. And I was so angry, I sat down and said, right, okay, what can I write that will definitely get published? And I came up with a concept. I wrote the book, and it got published because my rage is really powerful. And I pursued mainstream for quite a while. And then Imperium Games launched Traveller 4, and I sort of became involved with that because why would I not?
And how'd that go?
It was mixed. We had works accepted. I was writing with Neil Fryer at the time. And then Imperium Games went under. There's quite a story there, but they were bought out by Sweet Pea Entertainment, as I understand it, who made the first D&D movie. And I still have the contract from Sweet Pea Entertainment for the work I did. And the people who made the first D&D movie still owe me money.
Do you remember? Go on.
Sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt. Go on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, they renegotiated the contract, which means basically they told us 50 cents on the dollar, take or leave. I said yes, I'd take that because it's better than nothing. And then they didn't pay me. So I have a issue with D&D movies now because they owe me $150.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I know that's petty. I know that's petty.
Well, just avoid the movies. That means skip 5 of them or something, or 10 of them.
I've never seen any of them, and I realise I probably should get over it by now.
Now they're not good.
Oh, good.
Yeah, no, you're not missing anything. Yeah. Save your money. Yeah, don't try to get recompense that way. You'll just be angrier.
Sorry. One of the things that happened during the Imperium Games things, I started talking to Mark Miller. And we had a back and forth that went on for years. He sent me some early documents from what would eventually become T5. And we're talking here about 1998 or so. And I pitched the 1276 background, which became 1248. And there was a lot of discussion about that. And all of that stuff was going on during that period where Imperium had gone and nobody was really publishing Traveller. But I was still talking to Mark in the background. And both of us had lots of ideas. And some of them have happened.
Like?
Well, I did publish 1248. It had a very convoluted history. But eventually we did actually produce it. About 2005, 2006, we actually published it years later. And then, of course, Mark's T5 eventually came out, 2008, then about. But somewhere on an old hard drive, I still have his Alien development system that he was developing back in 1998. I can't even remember why he sent me that, but he did, and I have it.
Nice. Little piece of Traveller memorabilia for you.
Yeah, someday I'm going to go back and see how it matches up with the current one. I remember it being broadly similar, but there was a lot of years of development went into that.
So, where do you find inspiration for writing these histories, and how do you kind of put them together?
Well, I write a lot of real-world non-fiction, and no matter how inventive you are, real-world history is more bizarre than anything you could make up. So I do tend to be inspired by little pieces of real-world history that I've come across, and ideas. and certain principles, which Mark talks about. One of his big ones is everything is driven by economics. And when you start looking at a game universe in terms of logistics and economics and industrial capacity and that sort of thing, then quite often you can get an idea of what is possible at that tech level in that society. And that's your basis. Now you tell a story around it. So I think a combination of extrapolating from real world history and occasional moments of 3 o'clock in the morning, I wake up with an idea.
Do you keep a journal near your bed to record those things, or do you just jump up in the morning and hit the typewriter? I mean, word processor.
There were some nights, last night was one of them, where I went to bed, lay down, started thinking, told myself to stop thinking, got up and started typing. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I worked all night last night. I didn't go to bed because I'd had an idea. And I won't go to sleep. I will lie in bed literally typing the book out in my head, so I might as well press the buttons on the keyboard. Right. And I know it's not particularly healthy, but it's what I do. Mm-hmm. And some of the ideas are like, don't go to sleep, you'll forget it. But it doesn't matter because I can't go to sleep anyway because I've had an idea, right? Right.
And now you're obsessing over it, and you must get it out.
An old friend of mine used to call it a writing bug. Mm-hmm. You've had a writing bug, haven't you? Yeah, I've been up 3 days straight. And every project, I promise myself, there's a point in every project, I promise myself, that's it. When I get this done, I'm going to run off and live in the woods as a wild man. And I've even got a particular stretch of woods picked out. It's quite nice. Mm-hmm. But then there's another job. And I'm away again. I'm sure it's not healthy. I'm probably diagnosable as some kind of lunatic obsessive or something. But once I've got a story to tell, once I've got something that I want to say, it has to be typed.
That's cool. Do you do any kind of brainstorming, mind mapping, or you have any sort of structure or procedures that you go through?
I've always advised any writer. The phrase I used to use was real men use outlines. Mm-hmm. You should always outline everything, and you should update your outline. Because it will save you so much trouble when you've changed your mind about something. And yes, you absolutely must have an outline. And some of mine are just like a few words connected by lines, but there is an outline for everything. Because any project you just dive into and start typing on a blank page is at best going to be painful, and at worst you'll get lost and give up.
Yeah, I was in a online writing group, and my point was, a lot of folks like to do seat of the pants kind of writing, and others were, strictly outliners. And I'm in the outliner group, even if it's just some bullets on a napkin. It's a plan, and you can alter it later. But when things start getting really complicated, you can tell when somebody doesn't do an outline. It's just spaghetti. It's going everywhere. They're not on point. They're like, where is this going now? And you're like, you clearly didn't outline this.
I have had characters who I've realised wouldn't do that. When I was writing Nightfall in Avalon, there was a point where the two lead characters were going to go back to the city, and then I realised no, they wouldn't. Because they're too paranoid and stupid and larcenous to just do that. They wouldn't do the obvious safe thing because that's not them. So there are 3 chapters in that book that are essentially them doing something idiotic instead because they would. And I had to rework the outline because they'd gone off and done all this other stuff. Mm-hmm. It turns out I write about idiots quite a lot. You write what you know.
This one's about 3 idiots on a space station. This one's about 2 idiots on an expedition.
Yeah, that's basically where I'm coming from. At best, competent person, totally out of their depth, but usually, this guy's an idiot, or they've got an agenda, or they've missed something important. And in this case, these guys just took one look at my outline and said, "No, we wouldn't do that." And I had to accommodate the characters because I'd come to know them.
Sure.
And a lot of stuff does have to be driven by characters. But you still have to write down in your outline where you wanted them to be so you can get there in the end.
Right. Yep. The outline's got to be a living document that gets modified as you go along, because you do come up with better ideas, or you go like, wait a minute, this would be better if it was like this. And you didn't think of that at first, but now that things have developed, go ahead and add that in.
Absolutely. I think it was Dwight D. Eisenhower said, planning is everything. Plans are nothing, but planning is everything. And the act of planning through something at least lets you have an idea of how to fix what happens when your characters do something that you didn't plan at the beginning, but that's what they would do.
Right. So how did you go from kind of chatting in the back rooms with Mark Miller to writing for Mongoose?
Yeah, I'm going to be slightly egotistical here and say Mongoose decided to publish Traveller. So naturally I'm writing for Mongoose. But putting aside my massive ego, I remember at Gen Con UK in 2004, we were in Minehead and it rained a lot. And there was this big marquee and it had a floor made up of these like tile things, but they all floated around overnight because it had rained a lot. And then the heating failed. But all of that aside, Matthew was there, Matthew from Mongoose, and we had a bit chat about it because I was doing something else for him. I was Armageddon 2089. And we had a bit talk, and he said, I'm going to try and get a travel license. And he said to me rather cryptically, because I know what to do with it. He didn't tell me, he just told me he knew what to do with it. Fair enough. And a few years later, Mongoose started publishing Traveller, and I honestly can't remember, but I assume they approached me. I was already working with them. So I assume they said, well, hey, you know about this game, do you want to write for it? But I actually don't remember exactly how it happened. It's one of those things that, in hindsight, it was natural. They were publishing Traveller, I'd written for Traveller in the past. Well, what's going to happen here?
Right.
So I just sort of fell into it. They got me to do, oh dear, what was the first Mongoose book I did? I actually don't know. Nope, can't remember. But whatever it was, they got me to do one and then another and then another, and it's 20 years later and here we are.
Was it like Fiddler's Green or Type S or any of those?
No, those came later. Oh, no. Those, I think, were Avenger products, which then got rolled into the Mongoose line later on. The first actual Mongoose book I did, it might have been the original Spinwood Marches book.
Okay. So you listed here for Supplement 4 Central Supply Catalog.
That came later.
Okay.
I think it might well have been the Spinwood Marches book. But I honestly can't remember. You could look at the publication dates, and I'm sure it would be very enlightening, but I personally just don't know. Nope, I got nothing.
Yeah, that's right. You've written for a bunch of other publishers too, haven't you? It looks like
yes,
Avalon Games and a few other.
I did quite a bit of work for Cubicle 7, their World War Cthulhu stuff, because I'm an actual military historian. And, for example, they wanted a Special Operations Executive handbook, but with secret bits for when you run into the mythos. So you're being parachuted into occupied France, and you find out that the resistance are summoning Migo to attack the Germans with. So what's SOE protocol on that? And I had to write some really good fun stuff, like if you're fighting a Migo, don't bother with your bayonet, because they're made of contra-terrain matter, and impaling weapons don't work. So what does SOE advise its people to do when they're fighting Migo? It was fun. It was really good fun.
That sounds fun. How do you kill the Migo?
Incendiaries are good.
Incendiaries?
Or anything that'll just blast them apart. So actually birdshot from a shotgun
Good
is quite
shotgun.
good, whereas bullets just go straight through them.
Ah, okay, right. What dynamite?
You basically need to physically separate the bits of Amigo.
Gotcha.
So something like birdshot is actually a better option than a bullet.
Gotcha. Back in the day when we used to play, I liked Call of Cthulhu because you could, like, it's just so low tech. Your biggest weapons are like a Tommy gun and a shotgun, maybe a stick of dynamite. You don't really have armor or plasma weapons or even modern guns.
Yeah.
And you have to face the Eldritch Horrors with your dynamite and shotgun.
Your guns are all right against the cultists, but against the monsters, forget it.
Yep. Not so much.
Yeah. I loved Call of Cthulhu. It was utterly terrifying. But that was part of the fun. It was like, let's investigate and find out something we don't want to know.
Mm-hmm. And shouldn't know.
No,
right.
We weren't meant to know this.
Right.
But it's happening, and now we have to deal with it.
Exactly.
One of the things about it I liked, actually, was, again, you were quite ordinary people with ordinary people capabilities, and you were so outmatched by the bad guys, by the big bad guys. So you couldn't just put your power armor on and shoot it with a plasma gun.
No.
You're going to have to come up with something clever. You're going to have to lure it into a trap.
Yeah.
There's something you're going to have to do here. You have to solve problems. And I really like that.
Yeah, you can't really fight the cultists. You got to hide from them or run from them, or maybe you get one success. You overpower one or something, but here comes 4 more because they're cultists and there's so many of them, and it's yeah.
So it feels more like a movie than a lot of role-playing games do, because in a lot of movies, characters are constrained by what they can and can't do,
right.
So they have to come up with some clever solution, and that means there's a story. Whereas if you walk into the cultist lair in battle dress with a fusion gun, it's kind of over pretty quick, and it isn't much of a story, really.
Right.
Fun sometimes, but It's not much of a story.
I think we might have just keyed in on why there's a big crossover between Call of Cthulhu and Traveller players.
Yeah, I would think so. Because at the end of the day, you're just some person who's quite talented, but you're up against forces bigger than you.
Right. So, when you're playing something on the epic scale of Traveller, you could be up against overwhelming alien forces, overwhelming Imperial forces, overwhelming underworld forces. There's a lot of ways to be overwhelmed.
Well, when we did the Mystery Secrets and Wrath of the Ancients thing, we actually got the chance to not do that. We got the chance to actually create travellers who are superheroes. So what happened was that Gareth Hanrahan wrote Secrets of the Ancients. And then Matthew decided, it was one of his ideas. He has ideas. He shouldn't be allowed to have ideas. And this one was, how about we turn this into a trilogy? Because that won't be difficult or anything. And I would write the first and third around secrets. And the idea I came up with was that the travellers, during Mysteries of the Ancients, without too many spoilers, something happens to them and they start to develop extra human abilities. And you get to sort of guide a little bit how you develop. But by the end of it, the travellers are much more than ordinary mortals. They're essentially uplifted in the manner that the servitors of the ancients are. And they're able to sort of stride across a lot of problems. There's a lot of things that would be difficult for the average travellers. Don't be silly. I'm a genuine superhero. There are things I can do that mortals can't. And my brief was essentially go hog wild. And it was quite fun to do that in the Traveller universe. And so okay, yeah, you're now basically beyond anything a mortal can be. What do you do now? And what happens when you win? You've destroyed the big bad. I don't want to give too much away, but there is a scene where, if you choose, you can kick an ancient off the side of his spaceship into a black hole. And yeah, okay, now you've won. What are you going to do now? And
all right, now you've got the power of the ancients. Now what are you going to do?
Now what are you going to do? And I had to actually think about that. I think, well, what is there for these people to do? Because one of the problems with a lot of fiction lines is it bloats and it bloats and it bloats, and it gets to the point where the character is a commander-in-chief of the known universe. And why would they even get out of bed for most problems? But Matthew has sort of said, yeah, so we could maybe do something beyond this. Okay, so a bunch of ordinary people have become nearly as powerful as the ancients. What is for them to do? I know the answer to that, and I'm not going to tell you.
All right, you'll have to buy the line to find out. Because
we may be writing that one. And it's an opportunity to explore some of the big mysteries of the universe and just do stuff in Traveller that's never been done before. And I'm slightly horrified by the scope of this, because to me, 3 blokes in a spaceship with a shotgun between them is what Traveller's about. And this is this totally other level. But yeah, that's a thing that we might be coming back to in the future. What is there for these people to do? Well, like I say, I know the answer to that.
Yeah, there's tons of stuff. You know, a lot of people, they like the job simulator aspect of Traveller, where you're always broke and you're like just fixing your ship, and you know, but it's fun to not play that way too. Like, you know, your ship expenses are taken care of, and so now that aspect, that pressure is taken away. What do? Well, you pursue revenge, or you pursue your interests, or you learn of injustices that your character doesn't like, you know, and you know, money doesn't have to be, you know, there could still be like, maybe you want to fund a charitable trust in your name, or build a new wing onto the university. I mean, there's other things besides like direct money.
Yeah, that's something we had to do in ultimately the Wrath of the Ancients campaigns. Why would the Travellers do this? You know, what's their motivation? Money doesn't matter anymore. They've got all these powers. They can go and do anything they want. So what is there for them to do? And they have to make their own moral choices. And one of the choices is, do you turn into the ancients? Do you do the things they did? Or do you not? Do you do something else? Do you decide, for its own good, we're going to take over humanity? Because that is an option that you could try in this.
Or maybe you're going to go around uplifting things.
Yeah. Oh, did you just become the bad guys? Did you actually just become supervillains here?
Right.
And there's a lot of moral choices. Once this campaign hands Traveller characters tremendous power that doesn't exist anywhere else in the Traveller universe, and then just says, do what you like with it. And you have to make your own moral choices. And you need to ask yourself, what are you? Because you're very nearly a god. It's about time you decided what sort of god you're going to be.
And how are others going to perceive you? Are they going to perceive you as a threat and rally against you?
Yeah.
Or are you going to be benevolent? And even if you are benevolent, you could be perceived as otherwise.
Or even if you do your absolute best to make things better for everyone, what happens when it goes wrong? And you end up hurting people instead?
They didn't want to change.
They were just happy in their mud huts, you know. And there's a lot of moral questions raised by that campaign. That's, I think, a very interesting experience for the Travellers. What do you do if somebody really does hand you all that power? I suppose you could be the most epic murder hobos ever, but surely that gets old at some point. So what do you do? And that was the big question in that campaign. What are you going to do with all this power? And does that make you? Does might make right? There is an option to just kind of say, yeah, okay, that worked, and then just go away and live quietly in a hut because you've done everything. So, you know, what is there left? But no, I thought it would be fun to explore the idea. What happens after Ragnarok? What happens when you win?
That's an interesting topic. That is very interesting.
I mean, I actually know what happens after Ragnarok because I've written a book about it. the world is made renew, and people do survive into the new world in Norse mythology, and the world's lovely and fantastic and pure again. But it doesn't mean everybody's Ragnarok's like that. What happens when you realise the whole of humanity owes you its survival? Does that make you a bit arrogant?
Right. Well, I guess it depends on the character. Are you going to retire that character? Are you going to, I don't know what's possible as an ancient, but maybe you're going to ascend to a different state of being and float away as a ball of energy? I guess that's up to the character, really. Do you offer like paths to take in the adventures themselves?
Yes. We discussed this at the back of the book. What happens next? And the things that used to be a problem for these people are not anymore. Pretty much they can just do whatever they want. But what is worth? And we discussed some of the paths they might take. But ultimately, big question that the whole campaign asks is, who are you? Once you've become very nearly a god, who are you really matters.
Awesome. Do you like writing adventures or source books better?
Source books.
Mm-hmm. Why?
Adventures, I don't know. Every single adventure I write, I get about halfway through, and that stretch of woods starts to beckon. Just all the threads have to be tied up and all the rest of it. There are stories I want to tell, but at some point, adventures always become more complicated than source books, because the source books I write are very similar to the real-world non-fiction books I write. I'm truthfully reporting something that was made up as opposed to something that's actually true, but it's the same sort of thing. So you're just telling people how it is. But when you write an adventure, you have to start thinking in terms of, what if they don't do that? Because I hate railroady adventures. These adventures, and then the travellers go here and then they do this. I hate that. It has to be, there has to be freedom of action, there has to be agency. But that means you've got to work out, what might they do? And it's my long experience of players that no matter what you plan for, they'll find something else.
Mm-hmm.
Or they'll miss the big clue. Or they'll become obsessed about some random object they saw 2 scenes ago that's obviously the most important thing in the universe. And off they go, making a nuisance of themselves, trying to figure out something that's just a throwaway detail. Because players are like that. And as an adventure writer, you kind of have to, you have to account for that.
Right.
So yeah, adventures are more trouble to write, but there's some great stories to be told.
I feel like as long as the players don't realize they're being railroaded, it's okay. They end up someplace with no gas, and the obvious place to go is to go scoop the gas giant. What else would you really do?
I would say that's not railroading. If they find themselves in a situation where there's really only one viable choice, then okay, then fair enough.
Not one viable choice, but like the most, they're a lot of my players are risk averse. So if I give them like the easiest way to go, they'll take that way. And they'll think it was their idea.
And that's actually the key to adventure writing, is give them an obvious path. Only some players, in my experience, when you say to them, you have been hired to do this thing in this atomic-powered yellow submarine, do it. Oh no, disaster's happened, and to avoid the problem, you have to go in the atomic-powered yellow submarine and fix the problem, and they still won't notice. Mm-hmm. There are players like that.
Yes.
And I don't know what to do, and they just wander around aimlessly. It's like, all you have to do is go in the submarine, go to the place you were paid to go to, and fix the problem. I'm not referring to any specific adventure. Mm-hmm. Yes, actually I am. And when we've playtested, that is exactly what happened. The 2 players who the adventure was focused on, all they had to do was what they originally were told they had to do. But they failed to notice and wandered off instead. And we're running around in circles going, oh no, we're all going to die, this is terrible. It's like, dude, just do the thing that the adventure told you to do. That happens, and it's fascinating. watching players find entirely ass backwards way of doing.
Mm-hmm.
But railroading, when you say to somebody, right, you're out of gas and you've only got this one option, that's a plot device, fair enough. A lot of railroading, you see adventures where it says things like, and then you decide to go to this planet, and then this happens, and then you have to play through that. Then hang on, why did they have to go to that planet?
Right.
That's railroading.
Yep.
And I hate that. I don't mind putting players in a situation where they've only really got one decent option.
Mm-hmm. They're out of supplies, and the closest village is the one you want them to go to. You know,
and if they want to do something more difficult, that's what the rule book's for.
Oh yeah, sure.
We'll work it out.
Yep.
But yes, this is how you drive a plot without people really noticing. You just give them an obvious choice to solve their problem.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the same thing as railroading. To me, railroading is when you literally write, and then you throw down your weapons and surrender.
Right.
Which totally happened to me in a Moral Project game in 1984, and I'm not over it.
I would never trade my chocolate and gold bars for that.
Yeah.
I always thought it was funny that their trade kit was bars of chocolate and bars of gold and coffee.
And whiskey.
Yes, whiskey. Mm-hmm.
In the trade pack.
Yep.
Which they kept saying was 162-year-old whiskey, but it's not, because once it's bottled, it's not aging. Sorry, whiskey fan pedantry there, but once you put it in the bottle, it's not aging in the barrel anymore. It doesn't get any better.
Interesting.
So that was a lie. The trade pack was a lie. And I'm not over that either.
The natives are not going to know.
No.
They can't even read.
No, but then they're not getting the whiskey either. Because, you know...
I'm not trading the whiskey. Don't you railroad my whiskey.
Well, no. I mean, come on. The world's ended. There's the atomic wasteland out there, but I've got 12 bottles of scotch.
Right.
Well, the first thing I'm doing is reducing the number of bottles of scotch I have to carry. I played a lot of Moral Project.
It's a great game.
It was great. It was way ahead of its time because in its time, most of the adventures time were either dungeon crawls or they were like, it's a very railroady. The characters have to do this and then they do this and they do this. The Moral Project just went, here's the situation and here's what the people in the situation are going to do, and we drop a moral team in the middle of that and good luck.
Mm-hmm. And
you could pretty much just do whatever you wanted. There was a story that was developing around you and you'd get involved in it somewhere. But I really liked that, the fact that it was so open-ended. You had so many choices, and that's influenced my writing to this day.
Yeah, I liked it too. I like you just like your first game is you wake up in your vault and take it from there.
Yeah.
Do you help people? Do you become a robber baron? Do you take advantage of your situation? You know, what are you going to do? It's open.
Yeah. You know, you've what do you do? There's four of you. You've got all this modern equipment, and the world's gone to hell. You can do anything you want, but you were recruited to do a job. Are you actually going to try and do the job?
Yeah, no one's going to check up on you, or are they?
Yeah. I mean, I very much like Moral Project. Lone Star was one of the best adventures ever written.
Never played that one. I've only played Sword of Damocles.
Oh, Lone Star. You are trying to get to the LBJ Space Center because they've got satellite launch capability, and you could get a communication satellite up, and the bits of the project that have survived can talk to each other if you get the satellite up. But there's this absolute horde of barbarians destroying everything, and what's left of the US 7th Cavalry's fighting them, and there's a hurricane as well approaching. So the finale of the adventure is you're defending the last satellite against a horde of barbarians with the aid of the US cavalry. And it's truly epic.
Yeah, sounds awesome.
It's one of the best stories I've ever seen in any game, especially the ending, which I'm not going to give you spoilers for, even though most people will never play it, because it is so epic. It's just incredible. Huge influence on Well, I think it's probably one of the best adventures ever written.
So it sounds like you like all kinds of sci-fi. What other sci-fi games did you ever play? Gamma World or Shadowrun or Cyberpunk?
I own a copy of Gamma World. I think we played it a couple of times. And I have a copy of Earth Dawn for some reason that somebody gave me. But I don't recall really playing a lot of science fiction RPGs. I played Traveller, but for a long time, I used to write stuff. So everything I wrote, everything I wanted to play, I just wrote.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't buying the games that were out then, and I honestly don't really know what's out there now because I'm fully involved with Traveller.
Sure. So let's talk about the Fifth Frontier War.
Yeah, actually, can we digress slightly? Talk about Deepnight Revelation.
Absolutely.
So Deepnight Revelation was, I think, the second big Kickstarter. The first one was the Great Rift, Deep Space Exploration book. But Deepnight Revelation was interesting because essentially Matthew had one of the ideas. And what it came down to is it was a piece of art. He wanted this idea, which was a picture of what happens after the finale. And he more or less said, get me there. Get me to that picture that I haven't told the art people to do yet, but I will. Get me to that picture. And I was more or less turned loose at this point. So we ended up with this huge Kickstarter, and a lot of people bought into it, and we got 6 extension books and all the rest of it. And we ended up with this 20-year campaign, travelling right across all the way out to the edge of the spiral arm and the rest of it, a confrontation with this ancient evil and all the rest of it. And really the whole thing was I was just given an endpoint and told, get me there and tell me an interesting story on the way. And it was pretty epic.
Without spoilers, can you give us like what it says on the jacket or something of that?
Well, essentially, there are precursor adventures. There's Deepnight Legacy and Deepnight Endeavour. Deepnight Endeavour, you're out in the Great Rift, and you find a derelict exploration ship, and there's survivors on board, but not behaving normally. And it was very much inspired by films like Event Horizon, which I watched again the other night, and it's still creepy as hell.
Yeah. I like Pandorum as well.
Sorry?
Pandorum as well.
Oh, yes.
Space madness.
It's that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Big derelict spaceship, and its fuel tanks have been blown up, apparently by the crew in deep space. Why would they do that? And as you explore the ship, you find out there's different factions on board the ship, and there's also something. There's something that they found, and it wants to get to the inhabited star system. And then there's Deepnight Legacy, where it turns out it sort of did. And there's clues that the ancients actually sent a mission to this place where they know this thing came from. Nobody knows what happened to the ancients. Nobody knows what happened to the mission they sent. And the Imperium sends this Deepnight Revelation, which is a converted military cruiser. And she basically takes this 20-year voyage to get to this point to find out what is there and what is so dangerous about it. And so you travel immense distances and encounter all kinds of, the usual strange new worlds, very peculiar people. And eventually you get there and you find out just how serious this threat is. And, well, you're going to have to deal with it, aren't you? With what you've got on you. Whatever resources you've got available, whatever's left of your ship after this long voyage, yeah, that's what you've got. And it's basically Travelers versus the God.
I like it.
It was good fun to write. And the final scene, I think, is worthy of a movie. Final confrontation, I think it would make a good movie.
It sounds like you like to write your things kind of cinematically.
Yes, Yes, I'm a storyteller. And what I want to do is give the players a story to take part in. I'm not going to tell them the whole story, but I'm going to give them a plot, and what they choose to do with that's their business. And there's various endings to Deepnight Revelation, one of which ends with Matthew's vision. There are other things that could happen, because at the end of the day, the Travellers, they might fail, or they might make a different choice. But if they make the choices that we thought they would, the ending is heroic, tragic, and intriguing. Because again, what happens next?
Matthew said on well, before we move on, are those going to be did you say that's going to be a 3-part series, or is that just 2 parts, the Deep Night's campaign?
Which one? Deepnight Revelation?
Yeah.
The original box set is essentially a rule book for how to run the mission, and there's an adventure at the beginning, and there's the end adventure, and a sort of loose chart of what happens in between.
I see.
And it's up to you.
Gotcha.
But because it was a Kickstarter, we were able to produce 6 supplementary volumes.
Oh.
So there are 5 distinct regions that you pass through, and every one of them is different. Every one of them's got new threats. And then there's a 6th book, which is incidents that could be dropped in anywhere. And along the way, you encounter the story of the Ancients mission came before you, and how they made some terrible mistakes, and how they were kind of egotistical jerks, actually. There's a point where they encountered a frozen star. So naturally, they landed on it and built statues to themselves, because wouldn't you do that if you were the Ancients? And I like to think that there's an insight there in where the Ancients thought, just how arrogant they were. You know, they wielded tremendous power, and they were quite prepared to use it to build statues of themselves.
Nice.
I think along the way, there's a familiarity with some of the characters among the Ancients crew. So it's an idea. It's a bit, I suppose, environmental storytelling. You don't meet them; they're long dead.
Right.
But you find little bits and pieces along the way that they're left behind.
Sure.
And you sort of come to know some of the people who were on that ship. And then, of course, when you get to the end, you realise they tried and failed. They were the Ancients. They wielded powers we can't imagine, and they failed. And now we have to stop this thing.
And how are we going to do it? Is it possible?
Yes.
Okay.
There are a number of ways that you go about it. And one of the rules of my Traveller universe is, tell me a good story, and you might well succeed. If the players are clever and inventive and brave, then the referee's encouraged to let them try. There is a scripted way to do it, which is pretty epic. But if they come up with something else, that's fine. Because at the end of the day, we've given the players a story to take part in. But what happens, well, that's up to them.
Gotcha. All right. Is there what titles came after that you are more interested in?
After Deepnight Revelation, the next big Kickstarter was Mercenary, which is very crunchy and rules heavy. Because I actually worked in the defence industry for a while, so I was asked to do Mercenary as it should have been. There's an earlier version it's all right, but it doesn't really reflect the realities of mercenary work.
Mm-hmm.
I was once invited to be a mercenary in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had a job offer to go and be a mercenary in Egypt. Thereby hangs a tale that I won't get into right now. But I do know about these. And mercenary was it was an attempt to sort of do the sort of hammers slammers thing in Traveller.
Right.
And there's a lot of rules for running a mercenary company and resolving battles and stuff. It's very crunchy and rules heavy. There's not much story to it because it's not that kind of supplement. But it's, if you're a weapons nut, it's great. If not, well, it's more like a sort of backdrop. Because one of the things we actually said about the mercenary campaign is you don't have to write stories about soldiers. You could run, like, I'm a big fan of MASH. I grew up watching MASH.
Love MASH.
You could do a Traveller campaign that's set in a mercenary surgical hospital. And there's all manner of stories you could tell there. Or a logistics unit. It doesn't really do any fighting, but they get caught up in all the mess that goes on in planetary wars. So many stories you can tell against the backdrop of war. It doesn't have to be soldiers fighting things.
Right. I always appreciated it, and such a good show. It didn't glorify war at all. It showed the hardship of war and the heartbreak of war, and while at the same time being humorous somehow.
You can tell which episodes Alan Alda directed because the other ones are funny. His ones are always really poignant and sad. And it's like, yeah, I know what the end credits will say on this one. But it was a great show, and I acquired my sense of humour from MASH. That's possibly not a good thing.
Let's see. What do you think of? Who did you hate more, Frank Burns or Charles Emerson Winchester?
Now you're asking the difficult questions. I have no empathy whatsoever for Frank Burns. He was he was one of them. Whereas Charles Emerson Winchester trying to reconcile what he was with this place he was, I felt for him. He was really annoying, but you can see where he's coming from.
Right.
Where Frank Burns was just petty.
Yep. Yeah. Good point. Yep.
There we go. Answering the big questions.
There you go. Winchester was always trying to maintain some civilization within the chaos of and some culture within the chaos of what's going on.
Relate.
Yeah, and being frustrated.
I really can relate to that. Just trying to cling to these little shreds of civilization. And he got so upset when something beautiful got broken. I can relate.
Yep.
He was annoying as hell, man.
Oh, totally. But yeah, no, Frank Burns is on a whole other level worse. Because, like you said, petty, and...
I remember that scene where he's barking orders about how the canteen's supposed to be laid out. Applesauce. And it's just like, you petty little man. But, I've worked with people like that.
Right.
And that's why I don't have a proper job anymore.
All right, so after Mercenary, then what did we do?
There were various source books. We reworked the Springwood Marches book and the Neb book, New Behind the Claw, which is totally rewritten. And we did that for a few other places. Trailing Frontier, which is Gateway Sector. And that place is really interesting because most of it's outside the Imperium. There's all these little powers, and there's so many opportunities for 5 people in a spaceship to make a difference. We did some stuff in the Soleimani region, and the really interesting bit, the Rim Expeditions books, because what is Rimwood of the Soleimani? Nobody's ever answered this question, and we were able to sort of investigate this area, and there's some really interesting things out there, and there's some quite scary things. Stuff that's in the book. Read it again. And when the penny drops, let me know. Because, yes, there are some big problems waiting to happen out there. And the Imperium doesn't know anything about it because it's on the far side of the Soleimani. And we dropped some hints in that book, and then just leaving them for now. But at some point we'll revisit that. And it's so lonely there. You've got these little enclaves where the Soleimani have built a base and expanded to a few of the worlds. And then there's just nothing. There's just nothing for hundreds of parsecs. And you're out there exploring, and there's just you in this little ship. And rescue is a year away. And it's so claustrophobic and so lonely. And I was inspired, well, of course, The Martian, one of the best films ever made. But there's another film called Europa, about a mission to Europa. And it's gone a bit wrong, but they've managed to get there, and some of the crew are dead, and they've landed on the surface of Europa, and they are years out from Earth. And it's one of the most claustrophobic and terrifying films.
Yeah, I've seen that one. It's
possibly
good.
Watch. And I was sort of inspired by that idea that, like, yeah, there's nothing out here but you. Unless there is something.
And if so, what is it? So, do you have, did you come up with some new aliens and
Yes.
new civilizations?
There's a couple. There's the Ramak, who are a starfaring civilization, who for some reason are absolutely obsessed by fruit. They just love Terran fruit. Nobody knows why, they just really like it. And there's little enclaves of Soleimani who launched colonial expeditions in the ramshackle empire. They've sort of developed this civilizations out. And then there's something called the Hordes, which are like crystalline creatures that just sort of grow and get bigger, and bits come off them and they spread, and nobody knows anything about them except that they leach nutrients out of worlds they land on. So if fragments of a piece of the Horde gets on a planet, within a few years the world will be dead. And nobody knows how. And nobody even knows about them. And so who are these things? Are they sentient? Some people say that they've got an intelligence. What is going on here? And we sort of chucked that out. There's a couple of areas of space that people have really tried hard to get to. And the big question is, why? We don't, as far as we know, there isn't anything there. So why is everybody... The Hivers have tried to get there, the Soleimani have tried to get there. What's going on out there? So important. But the main feature of that set of books is just the sheer loneliness. You're so far out. There's no help. And there are people out here, but can you trust them? Because they might be as desperate as you.
All right, sounds like a great source book. It's got 160 pages, pretty generous amount.
Yeah, the thing is, I could have filled. We were able to only skim the surface, and I hope to review it because it is, to me, that's old school hard science fiction. You're right out on the rim. You're exploring the total unknown. You just have no idea what's in the next star system, and that's fascinating and terrifying.
Did you plant surprises around in all of the different source book expansions like those territories, different territory subsectors and stuff?
There are two things that I do, and one of them is I leave hooks. Things that we hope we can come back and explore this. So there's little sort of hints of this and that, and you can do what you like with it. But it might be that at some point in the future we buy an official supplement. And there's the odd throwaway line. And there's the odd sneaky reference to something which, if you know your classic science, you might realise what we're alluding to here. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there there are hints for the referee. Think, you want to run with this? You know, I'd be interested to see how you interpret this.
Right. Cool. All right. So what do we have after that? Does it catch us up to this year?
I think this gets us to Fifth Frontier War, more or less, because one of the things that keeps happening is Matthew says, "Oh, actually, can you just do this?" And there's an endless sequence of "can you justs." Mm-hmm. So things get interrupted, but the Fifth Frontier was something that Matthew and I talked about probably over a decade ago. It needs to be done properly. One of the problems is we've inherited information, and that information comes from a game that was designed to be balanced. Well, nobody launches a military campaign that's balanced. You don't say, they've got this many ships, we'll send that many. So we had to rewrite it so it made sense from a military point. like I said, I used to work in the defence industry, so I know about these things. And it had to make sense from a military point of view, but it also had to kind of fit the storyline. Only we talked to Mark, who said, do what you like. And the three of us had a conference where we talked about some of the things we do. What we agreed was, we don't know how the Fifth Frontier War ends. We have a script up to early 2010. Sorry, 1110. We have a script. This happens, this happens, this happens. But there's a point where we don't know how the war ends. At this point, we don't know. The actions of the Travellers and the way the different stories play out in the different adventures will actually influence what the ending is in your campaign. And that can go anywhere from total Zordani victory, total Imperial victory, some other thing in between. And there are some secrets, which I can't discuss at this point, but there are some secrets that may well come out during the adventures. There are already hints in the one I'm writing right now about the way people think and what they're trying to do and what they're hoping to achieve. And the ending, well, it'll surprise me. And I'm writing it.
Matthew said, however it ends up is going to be canon. However it ends up in your game will be canon.
Yes, and there's a lot more to that statement than meets the eye. But yes, how it ends up in your game is canon for your game, but also there were some other things discussed between Matthew, Mark and I about the future of the Traveller line. Comes out of the Frontier War. And there are reasons why we've done certain things, and there are hints in there of what might happen next. But there is a plan beyond the... Because they're not content with giving me 4 or 5 years of work to do. They also they have a plan beyond that. They have a plan beyond that. I apparently have some part in it as well. But yeah, we have a plan. We're doing something quite big here. Bigger than the Fifth Frontier War. If that's not big enough for you.
So how do you go about putting together a supplement like Fifth Frontier War? And what kind of information are should people expect to find in there? Like, what did you cover?
The thing is, the principles of a military operation are the same throughout all of history. So you have industrial capability, objectives, politics, logistics, and actual fighting capability. And what I did was I applied that, and I created a plan for the Zordani, and I created a plan for the Imperials, and I looked at how the two would interact. And I tried to look at it from the point of view of, I am a military historian, I'm writing a history of this war. I just happen to be making it up as I go. So I applied all these principles logically to what would happen with a certain amount of dice rolling. So yeah, this could go either way. We'll roll some dice and see what happens. Oh dear, that didn't go according to plan. And I would factor that in. And having done all of this, there is a script for the first few years of the war, based on what I believe would logically happen. Not just because of the firepower. It's very easy to say, well, why didn't the Imperium just send 100 dreadnoughts? But I know why they couldn't. Because I know what happens in the real world with politics and all the rest of it. And so I basically approached the Fifth Frontier War from the point of view of, if I was writing a sensible military history for the mainstream audience of a war, what would I be saying here? And along the way, I tried to incorporate the existing narrative. There are a few changes, but it's basically the same sort of thing. Point. But I went about it the way only I could. I applied real-world principles to a made-up scenario and just extrapolated.
Well, that was going to be my next question was like, okay, did you work at it from the front end, or did you work at it as a historian from the back end, or did you flip back and forth?
What I did was I made a premise for what the Shadani did and what they were trying to do. And there are things I know that maybe others don't about what they're really trying to achieve. I know what their end goal is. Very few people do actually know exactly what their end goals are, though you can figure it out if materials. And I looked at what the Imperials were doing, and I basically said, if I was a Shadani and I wanted to achieve this, what would I do? Well, I would do this. And if I was the Imperials, beset by all these internal politics and all these problems, what would I be doing? I'd do this. And then I just smashed them together based on what I know about real-world warfare and a bit of dice rolling, and said, did that work? Did the operation work? Did that one work? Did this one work? No, that one didn't. Well, how does this affect that one? And I just extrapolated from that starting point, and I literally had no plan when I worked through it. I was just saying, well, would this work? Would that fleet succeed there? And I tried to create a narrative make sense with the parameters that we know about, and with what the goals of the two sides were. So basically, I went in with no expectations. I just created a setting and said what would happen. And what's written in the Fifth Frontier Warbook is what I believe would have happened given that plan with those assets. What I will say is that there are surprises to come, and we've just discussed with Mark, and we've agreed that we're going to have to deviate from the known storyline. So there are some things going to happen that are going to surprise people, and there are some things that happen that enlighten people if you're looking closely enough. Why some things happen. But yeah, this is the big one. This is, I think, the biggest Traveller project there's ever been. And it's going to be worthy.
Did you guys come up with what to write next?
Well, what usually happens is that I get an email from Matthew saying, actually, I've had an idea. Can you just do this? So in the middle of this, I'm supposed to be doing the Frontier War pretty much exclusively. He suddenly decided, when we expanded the borderline, well, let's expand it some more. So I've just finished an expanded expansion of which is an area in Pax Ruthin. No, it isn't. It's Rimwood of Pax Ruthin subsector. It's in Trojan Reach subsector. And it sort of overlaps a couple of other areas. And it's quite an interesting area in its own right. But this is one of the things that happens quite a lot, is that Matthew has an idea. And what then usually happens is he tells me about the idea, and then I run with it. The end result is not what either of us expected. That's just happened with the Borderland. I didn't think it was going to be quite such a radical, right? But that's what happens. We have these great ideas and the great stories we tell them.
And do you have to spend time reconciling them against established lore, or maybe grumpy grognards, or?
Oh hell yes. One of the problems is that traditionally travel has been written from the point of view of pick a world, write a thing about it, write some library data, and you could sort of extrapolate the background from that. Now, I did the very first ever top-down supplement where I took a whole area and actually worked the big picture down to the smaller stuff. And when you do that, you start to realise that some of the stuff that's canon isn't all that plausible. And then you have to reconcile that. But that's my problem. And that's why I want to run off and as a wild man sometimes. Because you sometimes have 3 different versions of canon for the same area. And that can be a problem.
You just try your best to smush it together in an agreeable manner and just go from there?
Mostly, you can find a middle path. Or you can say, well, this is what's popularly believed, but it's not actually reality. Mm. You can do that up to a point.
I see. Everything you've heard up till now is rumors.
Yes. Well, that's imperial propaganda, that is.
Exactly.
That's not actually how it is. This is the reality. if you were to go there, this is what you experience. Occasionally, we do have to say, Mark, can you make a call on this place? Because there's two totally contradictory versions from different eras, you know, some in the 80s, some in the 90s, and they just don't match. Can we find a way to make this work? Mostly I thread my way through the complexities without I was going to say without too much difficulty, but that's not what I mean. Without too much difficulty for anybody else. Me, I want to live in the woods as a wild man sometimes, but you can usually figure out a way to reconcile it all. And if we can't, well, that's what Mark's there for.
Right. So what do you got coming out? Anything soon, or what should we be looking out for between now and next May Day?
Right then. So, in wider news, I have a book about the weapons of the Ukraine conflict, and I have some interviews about what is likely to happen there. That's on British Forces News, I think. I've got a book about the Celtic people. And as far as Traveller goes, I've got a lot of Fifth Frontier War stuff. I've got the expanded Borderland book, which has got some new interesting stuff in it. And also I have whatever Matthew decides will be happening next. There's a few little bits and pieces he's doing that are sort of lead-ins for stuff that I probably can't tell you about just yet. But future projects where I've done a little development on it, and that should be appearing in the next few months.
All right, cool. And are you on the socials? Can people follow you somewhere?
I have a Facebook page, and I have a website. Generally speaking, I tend to stay off the Traveller forum. I have my reasons. But if anybody contacts me direct, I'm usually willing to update them. I'll help people out, I'll answer questions. As long as they're polite about it, then I have no problem with that. But I try to stay off the main Traveller forums as much as possible.
I hear you. Is your Facebook page like an author page?
It's just my private page, Martin J. Dougherty.
Okay.
I'm not hard to find. I'm quite active in a bunch of areas.
I think I saw some of your posts around on the main Facebook Traveller groups.
I do sometimes. Yes, I am on Traveller post there, and I used to be quite active on the Mongoose forums, but not so much these days. But say if you find my website, send me a message. I will usually reply if I have time.
Cool, awesome.
I try to be accommodating if I can.
That's great. And yes, it's true. He answers his mails. He's answered all of mine. Let's see. All right. So where can people get hold of your publications? Are you available on Mongoose and Drive-Thru and other places?
Well, yes. I mean, the Traveller stuff, obviously, Mongoose and Drive-Thru. I've got some privately published stuff on Drive-Thru. There's little supplements I did as Avenger Enterprises. And if people buy that, I get royalty. So please do.
All right.
Because I like them. The mainstream Mongoose stuff you can get from Drive-Thru as well, or you can get direct from
Right. All right. Cool. Alrighty then. Let's see. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Well, I mean, if I can talk about anything.
You can talk about anything.
I really like swords.
Swords?
I am currently the president of the British Federation of Historical Swordplay. And we play sword fights, and it's awesome. I just thought I'd put that out. That's the thing that we do. So, you know, if you have an interest in swords, let's talk.
Awesome. Swords are cool. I just sadly sold my epee and my Schlager, and yeah, I didn't have anybody to fence with, so
I find that really sad.
It's so sad. My friends were all into SCA fencing, and I wanted to be too. And then when I finally got the money to put a kit together and stuff, I went through Zen Warrior Armory and got their like starter fencing starter kit. And by that time, my friends had all moved away and don't really fence. And yeah,
we don't. SCA is not really a big thing in Britain. But we do have quite a healthy historical fencing. We've got a big event coming up in a couple of weeks, and another event not long after that. You know, we've got a lot of historical fencing. Not the same thing as CA.
Right.
There's a sort of living in the period that goes with SCA that we don't do. We're just fencers.
Gotcha.
But I've seen things, and I know about the SCA from the back pages of old RuneQuest books where they talk about this, and it's always fascinating. It sounds absolutely awesome. Never got the chance to do any of it.
Yeah, you would. It's not collegiate fencing. You know, it's swashbuckling.
I also
if you will,
I also taught modern fencing for 20 odd years, and you know, competed to.
That's funny. A lot of Traveller people, you know, were into science fiction, but also anachronisms, like old.
It's funny that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's weird. I guess we're anachronisms both directions.
Yeah, I mean, basically, we're just not happy being here now. In the past, that's okay. In the future, that's okay. But right now, it kind of sucks.
If only I could be someone else, someone else.
Yeah.
All right. Well, cool.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, it looks like we've come to the end of our little interview here for Mayday. Martin, thank you so much for joining us for this Mayday interview. I appreciate your participation, and I hope you'll come back again next year.
I certainly hope so.
Fantastic.
I hope some of what I said's useful or interesting.
I found it very interesting.
Boring.
I'm sure everybody else will too. Great. It's nice to have you here for the first time, and sorry it took so long to get you on here. We've come to the end of our Mayday interview with Mr. Martin Dougherty, and until next time, my friends, happy traveling. Don't fly solo through the galaxy. Click like to join our alliance. Subscribe for your crew pass, and enable notifications to never miss an encounter. This journey is fueled by my patrons. Thank you, patrons. Feel the thrill of discovery. Become a patron and join the adventure.